Hey everyone, it's Shaylin, and I'm here today with another writing video. So today I wanted to talk about melodrama. Now, before I start this video, I want to make it clear that this entire video is a self-roast. When I was a new writer, melodrama was my shit. It was probably my greatest sin and indulgence as a new writer, but that's the reason why I wanted to make this video, because first of all, it's something that I had to learn a lot about in terms of how to avoid it, because it was one of my most epidemic writing problems, and second of all, I think it's probably one of the most common writing problems for new writers, so I wanted to share some strategies that I've learned for how to spot melodrama and how to avoid it. First of all, what exactly is melodrama? Basically, melodrama is when the emotions being presented are not supported or earned by the storytelling. So the story is too emotional for what it is. Now, because of this, it actually loses its emotional complexity because it's kind of just over the top. So instead of becoming impactful, it just kind of becomes cringy or eye-roll worthy. It's very hard to find the balance between too subtle and too overt when it comes to expressing emotions. I find writers generally overcompensate based on their fears. So I think there are a lot of new writers who are really scared of the writing being too melodramatic, so then they withhold too much and it's boring and detached. And then there are a lot of writers, probably I would guess the majority, but I don't know, I haven't done studies on this or anything, who are scared of the writing being bland and boring and not emotional, and so they kind of hit that point way too hard, and that was definitely me. I always felt like I wasn't expressing the emotion that I was trying to express, but actually I was expressing it way too much. Like, if I was writing a scene where the main character was sad, I would be like, wow, this isn't coming across, and I would just hit the point so hard that it was coming across. It was coming across a lot, too much. And so the first point that I wanted to mention, probably the least concrete, the least technical, but maybe one of the most important, is to trust yourself. It might be a misconception that melodrama happens because the writer wants more emotion, but I think it's generally the result of the writer thinking there is no emotion and not trusting their ability to convey emotion. Maybe I'm just, I don't know, projecting my own experience onto other writers, but I always felt like I wasn't getting this across, but really I was getting across way too much, but because I felt like I wasn't getting it across, I would be like, just pile it on way too much. So the first thing is just trust yourself. Trust your skill and your ability to convey an emotion with a sentence rather than 5 paragraphs. And the other thing I wanted to say is to not really worry about this too much in your first draft. It can be a fine line between melodrama and intense emotion in certain scenes, and if you're too caught up in that, you're not going to be able to finish your draft. It's like descriptions. They're probably not going to be all there. They're probably going to be wordy or not enough or too much on the first draft, and that's fine. Emotion is the same. You kind of just have to get it out and then come back to it later and get the balance later, because it's going to be very, very difficult to draft if this is all you're worrying about. A lot of this is line level stuff and it's easy to edit. So just get the story out and then come back and figure out this balance between emotion and melodrama in the editing phase. Alright, so now let's get into some more concrete tips and ways to avoid melodrama. Number 1. Language use and purple prose. Sometimes melodrama comes from using language that is more intense than is warranted. This is basically what purple prose is. It's over-the-top, unearned poetry, and it's pretty melodramatic. But a lot of the time, it can just be word choice. Some word choice is just very, very loaded and very emotional. Number 2, mentioning souls. Now, this might seem very specific, like weirdly specific. This is just something I've noticed. Souls are a very melodramatic concept because it's spiritual and lofty, and it has melodramatic connotations. I know when I look at my old writing, like I'm talking writing from when I was like 15 and it was extremely melodramatic, one of the things that I noticed recurring is me mentioning souls in regards to emotion. So I would say something like, anger bubbled in my soul, or I felt sadness in my soul. I don't know, this isn't a direct quote from my writing, but stuff like that. I would, talk about feeling things in your soul, and it's so melodramatic just because the concept of a soul is in essence very melodramatic and emotional. Now, one exception I just want to mention here, you have some sort of system where the soul is actually not necessarily concrete, because obviously a soul isn't concrete, but you have some sort of system where souls are actually important to the system, like magic involving the soul or whatever, or some sort of religious practice, then that's fine because it's out of an emotional context, but I would avoid mentioning souls in relation to an emotional context. Number 3, pathetic fallacy. So pathetic fallacy often refers to when the natural world mirrors the character's emotions. So for example, it's raining because I'm sad. It's not actually raining right now, it's sunny, and I'm happy, so pathetic fallacy. But another form of pathetic fallacy is just personifying the natural world. Now, personification isn't a bad literary device, but personifying the natural world, especially in excess, can become quite melodramatic. It's kind of similar to the soul thing, where it gives the natural world this lofty spirituality. Number 4 would be no subtext. So subtext is basically everything the characters aren't saying, but what they're really saying. When characters just say what they mean without subtext, a lot of the time what they mean, the thing they're withholding, is that really dark, deep emotional thing that they don't want to express. And if they just say it out loud, if there's no subtext, whether in dialogue or in the character's narrative, then it becomes quite melodramatic. It also removes the subtlety and possibility for interpretation in your story, but it's also melodramatic, so it's best to have subtext. An exception to this might be like very young characters, or if your character is drunk or something. Obviously there are exceptions to this. If there's interpersonal conflict involved, an adult human who has control of themselves will probably be speaking with some degree of subtext. Number 5, cliches. Now, cliches, especially even on the line level, can be really melodramatic because they're just familiar. I don't really know why they feel so melodramatic to me, but for some reason, if I'm reading prose and there's a lot of cliches or familiar phrases, it just makes it seem melodramatic to me, even though there's nothing really inherently emotional about a familiar phrase. I can't really explain this one, it's just something that I find to be true. Number 6, forced suspense. Forced suspense would be another, I think, example of a writer not trusting themselves. They don't trust their ability to create suspense, so they kind of tell you that there's suspense. I'm gonna give some very over-the-top examples of this. When you end a chapter with, like, and we had no idea what was about to happen. Ending every chapter on this really forced line, forced cliffhanger, where you're really hitting the point way too hard, it's suspenseful, keep reading. It's actually super melodramatic, it's also cringy, it also kind of kills the suspense because it's telling instead of showing the suspense. And I find that it's something that often happens at the end of scenes where the writer wants to like wrap things up but keep you reading, so they kind of throw this like one-liner at you where it's like, keep reading because this is suspenseful, but it's also melodramatic. 7, talking too much about abstract concepts. This is going to relate to what we often say about show don't tell in terms of emotions, but talking about abstract concepts like sadness, anger, love, peace, quite melodramatic, similar to the soul thing. Even if it's not like the main character being like, I am sad, so it's not even a telling thing, it's just having discussion of abstract concepts in the narrative rather than showing them through the character's world and how the character experiences the world. Even showing them through symbolism would probably be a stronger way than just having the character go on a little side tangent about the nature of sadness. Occasionally you can earn these things, especially in a novel where you are going to have more leeway with melodrama at some points because you've earned more investment. 8, being off balance between telling and showing. Both too much showing and too much telling can lead to melodrama. If you tell too much, it's too overt. You know, this is things like, she was angry. You know, it's not interesting, there's no emotional texture. I think it's common for writers to be very aware of this show don't tell rule. And so, they go, I need to show. But they show way too hard. If you show with too heavy a hand, and you hit those points too hard, then it's just overblown. And so, it's again that trust thing, like trust that you can convey emotion with a line, with a subtle character gesture, rather than going on this long tangent about emotion and having the character cry and all of this. Trust that you can convey things in subtle ways. 9, dreams. I will admit, I have a personal pet peeve in fiction where I really dislike dreams. Yes, there are cases where you can use a dream and it makes sense, but in most cases, I feel like dreams are forced symbolism or very bad ways of conveying information. A lot of the time, when dreams are used in fiction, It's used to show us something the character is feeling deep down through their subconscious, through their dreams. It ends up actually being this really weird extreme situation, and it's not subtle at all. I think it's often maybe thought of as like a subtle technique where it's like, oh, I'm just gonna use dream symbolism and I'm not gonna actually show you what the character is feeling, but it's quite evident through this dream about the main character seeing her brother standing on a cliff and then he disintegrates and she's standing among the ashes or something like that. I don't know. It's not actually that subtle at all. It's like maybe pretty obvious, but it's like meant to be subtle, and so then it's kind of like really melodramatic. I'm not a fan of dreams. I know some people don't mind them. They're a personal pet peeve of mine. This is why I think they're melodramatic. They're also not happening. They're not real. So as soon as I know something isn't real, I'm like, why do I care? I don't. 10. Forced symbolism or heavy-handed symbolism. Now, I like symbolism. I'm a fan of symbolism. I'm pro-symbolism. But I think symbolism can veer into melodrama if it's too heavy-handed. Like, you know, it's very obvious in that, like, overtness. Like, it's a symbol, but it's not subtle. It's obviously a symbol. It's hit too hard, or it's really forced. And I think a lot of this happens when the main character is too aware of the symbolism. But if the main character is aware of the symbolism, you don't really need it. Like, I don't really like it when main characters have some object and she's like, and this locket represents my mommy issues because it holds the secrets of my family that I don't understand. I don't know. I'm just making stuff up right now. If the main character is aware that it's a symbol, it's not really a symbol. A symbol is one half of a metaphor, but you just kill it being a metaphor by going, oh yes, this is the metaphor. Like, you have to let symbolism speak for itself and be somewhat subtle, or else it's very heavy-handed and melodramatic. Take a shot every time I use the word melodramatic in this video, but don't actually. I'm not encouraging you to actually do this. Please don't do anything I tell you. The whole point of this video is like, oh, you should do what I tell you, and I just said don't do anything I tell you. I'm gonna move on to the next point now. 11. I don't have 11 fingers. 11 is abusing Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law is basically everything that could possibly go wrong goes wrong. Now, obviously, in fiction and in writing, things are gonna go wrong. That's the nature of conflict. Things might go wrong more often than they go wrong in real life. However, abusing Murphy's Law is like, every single thing is bad. Like, there's literally no light, there's no hope. Every possible thing that could go wrong goes wrong. So instead of having this, like, ebb and flow of, like, success and defeat, success and defeat, success and defeat, you just have defeat, 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 defeat. Obviously, you need conflict and things are going to go wrong, but when you throw in random hardships that don't really play into the main plot, that becomes quite an abuse of Murphy's Law. It's like, this is what the story is about. Oh, here's some random bad shit coming in just to make things even worse. This doesn't contribute. 12. Again, I don't have 12 fingers. 12. Overly intense character reactions. It's not just the reaction itself, but it's how it's described. Like, I always think of, man, I feel bad. I'm just gonna roast this poor person that is a friend of mine. I was reading a story in workshop, not a bad story, but there was just this one moment, and it was in like the first few pages where a main character breaks down and starts crying. And the thing is, like, honestly, realistic. Like, this character learns that her sister died, like, just learns that she died and immediately starts sobbing. But because of the way it was described, where it was like they were on a beach and she like fell back in the sand and was sobbing, I couldn't really take it seriously as the reader. I was like, oh, this is just really melodramatic right now, describing this like fit outburst she's having. You know, if she was gonna cry, maybe using less intense language, or having her cry but not so like messily, or even not having her cry and having a more subtle reaction that could still express how the hurt that she was feeling. Giving your characters appropriate reactions to things and then also describing them with the appropriate level of intensity. The last thing I wanted to say in this video is to have genre awareness. Some genres, though, are going to be inherently way more melodramatic. Like, YA as a category can be quite melodramatic because teens are angsty. Melodrama is relatable to the youth. Obviously, I'm not saying to purposely make your work melodramatic, but you can have much more overtness with emotion in YA, because YA is primarily meant to be relatable to teens who have all of these feelings and are like, I want to read about people who have these angsty feelings that I also have. If you go genre to genre, like romance, probably going to be a much more melodramatic genre than like, what would be a really non-melodramatic genre? For some reason I want to say like mystery, like crime, but I don't know, I don't read that, so maybe that shit is melodramatic. Know your genre. I don't know all the genres and what's appropriate in all of them, but know your genre and what is kind of allowed and what the standard is and what people would be expecting. Because like if I gave you like a romance novel but the emotions were as pared back as they are in a lot of literary fiction that I read, but you're primarily a romance reader and that's what you want, you'd probably be kind of disappointed. You'd be like, why is everyone so cold? But then also vice versa. So that's everything I wanted to say on avoiding melodrama. I myself, big fan of melodrama back in the day, let me tell you. Reading my old work is just so many emotions, just so many of them. So I hope that this video is helpful for anyone who struggles with this in their writing. So thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can always send me an ask on Tumblr, and I will see you in another video. Bye.